CNBC host Jim Cramer, on one of his shows recently, Mad Money, he criticized Donald Trump in the starkest of terms and levied an insult that I think is going to hit Trump close to home, given what Trump has said about this individual that he's going to be compared to. But Jim Cramer himself had been going around and speaking positively about Trump and his economic agenda before the election. Now he's actually seeing it in action and is saying not so much. Now, what's really upsetting, I'll play this clip for you. It is interesting. Kramer's one of those people who I've met so many people who know who he is and don't like him. And I've not met a single person who likes him. But during the campus, clearly some people like him because he stays on TV forever. But during the campaign, he said stuff like this.
If you're in the stock market, if you care about your paycheck, you go with Trump. That's what you do.
You do?
Yeah, well, he wants to cut your taxes.
Oh, he wants to cut taxes.
Your taxes.
My taxes got raised enormously. Well,
if you care about your taxes, you go with Trump, he says. Now, that's strange because as someone who, given that he gives a lot of financial advice, should be reading up on what it is that the consensus among economists is, it was very easy to see that if Trump actually did the things that he said he was going to do, that would be bad for the economy. But back then he was saying if you care about your paycheck, which everyone does, then you should be going with Trump. Different message now that he's seeing it in action. If you appreciate the show, by the way, please do click the subscribe button. Here he is.
BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, who writes an annual chairman's letter required reading for anyone in the markets, wrote some fateful words today. Quote, I hear it from nearly every client, nearly every leader, nearly every person I talk to. They're more anxious about the economy than any time in recent memory, end quote. I come back and say, I believe that. I believe that wholeheartedly. But let's think about what that really means for you and me. We have declining inflation, except the president's putting on inflationary tariffs. We have incredibly low unemployment, except where it's caused by the Trump administration. We have a market that was doing extremely well last year until the Trump administration sowed a level of uncertainty that I can't recall any time since, are you ready, ski daddy, Jimmy Carter, which is the last time people were really worried about inflation, about stagflation, okay? Back then, stagflation was real. Now, Jimmy Carter, curious benchmark. Break out the cardigan sweater. I know it's a brutal comparison. You think I did it idly? I cannot think of another president in my lifetime who knocked down the stock market simply by opening his mouth than Jimmy Carter. Eureka! I have found him. So let's look at it this way. Everything about this economy is good. Everything, except one thing. We have a president who's very angry at everyone except Vladimir Putin. Oh, no, maybe even Vladimir Putin. And his wrath has made investors so downcast and so negative that people have just given up. They want nothing to do with stocks, nothing to do with this world, because they're sure the White House will keep laying on the tariffs that seem to be wiping out your wealth and my wealth. In this environment, it's a wonder anyone's buying anything, unless they think that the one person who's standing in the way of a great economy, one that could have incredible growth with lowered inflation, lower oil prices, less regulation, more confidence, will finally change the stripes. If Trump can lose the anger, drop the scowl, stop diminishing our friends and rivals while making common cause with our enemies.
What a this is. I gotta bring more energy to my segments. If you're watching this, you might think that Jim Cramer didn't actually say what he said during the campaign. It's crazy. It's crazy, I tell you. Wow. The arm movement. Oh, it's fun.
And generally start acting like he did in his first term, well, that would be huge for the stock market.
Huge for the stock market.
As far as the stock market is concerned, though, we need less Jimmy Carter, more Ronald Reagan. Bottom line, maybe Wednesday is a deliberation day. It's just the day when American investors may be finally liberated from the president's not-so-pro-business attitude once he gets the tariffs out of the way.
This is just... Jaden, why don't we have more elements, more pizzazz like Jim Cramer? He's the one who said, if you care about Trump, you know what he participates in? And he made a lot of the comments about Carter, and I referenced that hit Trump close to home because Trump has degraded the sort of history of Carter a bunch as well. And there's a huge mischaracterization of Carter. I addressed that when he passed. But it is people like Jim Cramer who, because of whatever reason, because it would seem not like a savvy businessman to support Harris, if you're just used to supporting Republicans, if you just really want tax cuts for the rich, you chose to participate in the misleading of people about what the two agendas were. But what we're hearing from a lot of people in the media is this total confusion and shock about what Trump's doing. But he laid this out, and people analyzed and said the impact would be detrimental. But a lot of people like Jim Cramer had the sort of, he's not really going to do it. He says he is, but he's not really going to sort of attitude, right? And actually what he's going to do is he's just going to sort of cut taxes, won't be much, and won't do anything significant. And it's a part of the media that misled people into thinking it was a reasonable choice. Because we're on the subject of Jim Cramer, this clip is iconic.
I haven't seen you since college, for heaven's sake. You're looking good. Hey, how are you? Look, I mean, are you just anti, per se, a GOP-1? You're going to analyze it, because I always remember you as an analytics person, not a person who's just gut.
So that's a question.
Well, how do
you... most of what RFK Jr. has been up to since he decided he would do anything to get into power, even shifting all the way from a Democrat to independent to Trump. But that was a solid response. What was the question, Jim? Listen, you know that everything in the stuff, and so also in the analyzing, you think? A different CNBC host, Andrew Ross Sorkin, who did correctly assess Trump's economic agenda beforehand, had this to say on MSNBC about, as Trump's calling it, Liberation Day tomorrow, where he's going to lay out, even though he won't explain exactly what it is until he does it, which is not good for our economic environment because people don't know what's going to happen when, but where all the different tariffs, as I mentioned before, will be laid out in full, and the full trade war will be underway. Sorkin had this to say.
Liberation Day, what's it looking like? How's the market responding?
Not well. Look, I think that we're going to get whatever numbers we get tomorrow are just the beginning of a much longer story. So the idea that there's going to be some certainty tomorrow is almost impossible to believe, in fact, because of just the video you played, which is to say that every country around the world is going to have its own discussion about, okay, what do we do about this? And are there going to be retaliatory tariffs? And once you get into that debate, then there's going to be a question mark about if they go up, does the U.S. go up? And does this sort of escalate? Or does it turn into some kind of grand negotiation? But it's going to be country by country. You may have blocks like the EU do it, but that's the complicated part. So this idea that uncertainty somehow becomes certain is not the case. It actually creates even more uncertainty over time until maybe you get to a place where actually there is some agreement. And look, maybe that could happen, but it's going to be a period of time that I just can't imagine stops. Because, by the way, the political calculation in each of these countries, the pressure they're going to put on their own politicians to say, you can't just sit here and take it. You got to do something else.
Well, and Europe's.
So that's correct. And he has the credibility to say, I warned of the impact of this. But I come back to it. I'm fine if you change your stance, and that's good. And as the facts change, you want to make your assessment change. But you also have to acknowledge that you were saying incorrect stuff beforehand, like Jim Cramer, because it wasn't even sort of ambiguous. It was very clear. It's just that a lot of people did Trump the service of convincing people he didn't really mean what he would say, and that they can assume the best and just assume that Trump's going to do whatever you think you want him to do. And that's the type of, and that's not something that people ever do with Democrats. Like when Biden makes a statement and there's some controversy around it, all of the quote unquote liberal media covers it, takes the text of what he said, and assumes that he meant it. When Trump will say something like a crazy economic proposal or some crazy threat or talking, against the First Amendment with his media rhetoric, there will always be this, well, he exaggerates. When he said 100% tariff on this, that, the other thing on the campaign trail, he was alluding to something different. And that creates an environment where the people who want the extreme stuff vote for him for that. And people who maybe wouldn't be as on board with the extreme stuff or are voting on their own economic well-being, they end up finding in Trump's campaign what they want to see in it instead of what was actually there, because the Kramers of the world were willingly or accidentally misleading them. And so I wish at least we could see an acknowledgement of that those who were laughed at whenever they would say this could be really bad for our democracy, for our economy, etc., were absolutely issuing correct warnings. Share your thoughts in the comments.